This is a continuation of this story. So if you haven't seen part 1, the link will be in the description. I advise you watch it for better understanding. The type of animal skulls also began to create a more refined geographical profile when cross-referenced with specific habitats. A particular subspecies of ground owl, whose tiny skull was nestled amongst the others, predominantly nested in the higher altitude rock formations found within the Diablo Canyons. The second victim was identified as Sarah Kim, a geology student from UNM, reported overdue from a solo mapping expedition in the Diablos a week ago. She hadn't even been officially listed as missing until yesterday, her check-in window having just expired. Her car was found abandoned at a little-used trailhead, leading directly towards the Twisted Sisters peaks, precisely where the high-grade turquoise veins and unique ground owl habitats converged. He had not made his work of her there where she fell. He had brought her down from the mountains of Henderson's flatland and set her up for us to see, a signpost in the desolation. He had made Ashton for practice, to learn his craft. But this woman, she was a map. He drew the lines, and he set the markers for me to read, as if he knew the man who would come looking, as if he expected a certain eye to follow his sign. "He wants me to find him, Sheriff," I said, standing in Brody's office, the preliminary report on Sarah Kim in my hand. These aren't random victims anymore, and their placement isn't random. He's leaving clues, geographical markers. The sheriff looked at the report on the woman, Sarah Kim, and the lines in his face were deep. "And you think this workshop of his is up in the Diablos?" "I'm almost certain of it. The turquoise, the specific owls, Sarah Kim's last known location. All points to those canyons around Twisted Sisters. That's suicide. Mac, go in there after him. That's his home turf. We can set up a perimeter, maybe use a helicopter for aerial recon. If he even has a fixed base, we could search those canyons for weeks and find nothing. He's moving his victims. He knows the terrain too well. By the time a full search team is organized and deployed effectively, he'll have vanished or worse, taken another life. No, if I go in quiet, alone, he might just lead me to wherever he feels most comfortable, most powerful. It's a risk, a huge one, but..." Brody put his hand flat on the wood of his desk, and he stared at it. After a time, he said, "But you feel it's the only way to get ahead of him." He stared at me for a long moment. "All right, Mac. All right, but you go in with full comms, as long as they last. Check in every 30 minutes once you're past the trailhead. One missed check-in, and I'm sending in everything we've got. Protocols be damned." "Understood," I said. The sun was falling toward the western mountains when I turned the truck toward the Diablos. The good road ran out, and then the graded dirt ran out, and then it was a track among the stones that clawed at the tires. The land rose up in walls of stone, ancient and brooding, and the air in that place felt older, holding a charge. I parked my truck near the same deserted trailhead where Sarah Kim had left hers, and I took a deep breath. I took my pack, the rifle, my sidearm, and extra water. I stood a moment where the trail began, a faint depression in the gravel and rock. Only the wind moved through the narrow rock passages with sighing sound. Sarah Kim's tire tracks were there, already faded by that wind. There was no other sign. I went into the canyon. The stone walls climbed into failing light, streaked with ochre and crimson, and the green sickness of copper where turquoise might be found. The gravel turned under my boots, and the sound was loud in that great silence. My radio crackled a last time before the stone would take the signal. "Unit 12, what's your 20? Sandy's voice. At the Twisted Sisters trailhead. "Sandy," I said, "entering Diablo Canyon now. Beginning 30-minute check-ins." "Copy that, Mac. Godspeed." I thought, yes, Godspeed. I'd need it. And I went on into the dark where he waited, or where he did not. But he knew the way of my coming. I was walking into his country, into the stone heart of his work. He had the place chosen, and he had the shape of the thing he would make of what I brought him, which was myself. The canyon became a stricture in the rock, and the walls drew in upon me so tight that I was able to lay hands to stone on either side with my arms stretched wide. The air held the chill as of a cellar cut from the mountain, heavy with the damp scent of unlit earth and something more, a taste of metal and chemicals raw in the throat that overlaid the dead dust of the place and the breath of its old decay. The wind that had moved with some life in the upper reaches was dead here. There was only a great stillness and the sound of water weeping from hidden seams within the stone. The light failed within the deepening stone. I traded the flood of the hand lamp for the harder beam upon the rifle, a spear of light that drove into the gloom before me, but left the world to either side in greater shadow. The smallest sound of my passage, the whisper cloth of the grit of boot sole upon the rock, came back from the stone walls magnified and ill-omened, so that I moved like a man beating a drum in that silence, announcing his coming. The 30-minute transmissions to Sandy were terse, my voice tight in my own ears. Still moving west into Diablo's main gorge. Nothing to report. Yet the hairs on my neck stood for what I did not see, and knowledge grew in me that I was being watched. Then the signs appeared, set forth upon the rock as markers. A stone rounded like a dark egg upon a high shelf where no stone should be, and it gave off a faint sheen as of some hoary luminescence or the very damp of the grave. A posy of dried desert sage tied with that same deliberate loop and twist of old wire that had bound the woman at Henderson's ruin. And then the rock turned sharp upon itself, and the beam found a spray of raven feathers, black against the pale stone, pinned there with slivers of bone driven into crevices, and at the tip of each feather a chip of blue stone was affixed, gleaming like a mad eye. The narrows gave way then to a hollow in the stone, a kind of grotto no more than 20 feet from wall to wall, roofed over by the mountain itself. And I saw his place. My breath went still in my chest. I had schooled myself for what might be there, but the thing itself was beyond the geometries of any sane man's imagining. It was a small space. Along the far wall, shells of weathered wood, rack of some ancient flood, and stones balanced one upon another in defiance of their nature were laden with the tools of his artifice. Chisels from some old mine, hammered and honed to a cruel edge. Sinew of animals, dried and coiled like snakes, all shaped from bone. Buckets held clays of different earth, done in ochre and a black like night. Pouches of powdered pigment. Choya segments lay in rows, their spines clipped with terrible care. And jars. Glass jars holding liquids of strange color, and in them swam shapes I would not name, fragments of things, feather and tooth and hair, and what looked to be the parings of human nails. But the altar of that place was a slab of sandstone at its center, and upon it pulsed a light not of this earth. Great fungi he had brought from some deeper dark clung to the rock nearby, and their ghostly luminescence lit the slab and what lay upon it. Polished stones, flakes of obsidian, black and sharp, and human bones. The long bones of legs are a femur and a tibia, a collarbone like a piece of white porcelain, all cleaned, burnished, with small holes drilled into their surfaces, as if for stringing. From the cracks in the rock walls hung his other works, his sketches in flesh and bone. The carcass of coyote, dried and stretched, its rib cage broken open and packed tight with glittering quartz crystals. A thing made of bird wings and the skulls of small beasts, all wired together to turn and shift in some breath of air I could not feel. It was a charnel house in the atelier of a demon. I could smell the iron scent of old blood and the sharp bite of his chemicals, and a sweetness, too, the cloying perfume of rot held in careful stasis. I swept the rifle's beam into the deeper shadows. "All right," I said. My voice was a rasp in that dead air. "I know you are here. Show yourself." Nothing, only the ceaseless drip of water that measured out eternity. Then a sound scraped stone behind me. I spun with the rifle, my finger at the trigger's curve, and he stood there in the mouth of the passage where I had entered, a figure dark against the lesser dark of the canyon beyond. He blocked the only exit. He was tall and built of wire and bone, and his clothes were the color of the dried earth, so he seemed a thing come forth from the rock itself. He held no weapon that I could see, but his hands were there before him, dark with clay and with some other substance, older and blacker. His face was lost to the shadow, but his gaze I felt upon me, a pressure. "You appreciate it, detective." His voice was a soft and reedy thing, not the growl of a beast, but some dry rustle, the voice of a man certain in his vision. Not many can see the beauty in transformation, the way the desert takes, and the way I help it along. "Beauty," I said, the rifle steady on his heart. "Ashton, Sarah Kim, Is that what you call beauty? A nod from the shadows, slow as the turn of a season. They are constant now, detective, beyond time's reach. Their decay is arrested. I gave them permanence. The desert is a slow artist. I accelerate. I refine. He took a step, a small shift of his weight forward into the fungal light. You stay where you are, I said. He did not listen and came on another step. You, Detective Cole, Marcus, you understand the land. You see the patterns. I saw it in the way you studied Thomas. You look proper, like a connoisseur. Sarah, she was destined for my celestial offering piece. Henderson's scarecrow, you called it, fitting in its own way. She gazes at the stars I adorned her with, forever. A chill that had nothing to do with the cave's air moved in my blood. He had heard me. He had been there in the dark paddock at Henderson's, listening. This is not art, I said, my voice a hollow sound. This is murder. This is sickness. There's a difference, he whispered, and then he moved, not at me, but to the side, a lean and sudden motion like a striking snake, his hand outstretched to the rock wall beside the passage. His fingers found some purchase there. A groan of tortured stone came from above me, a deep guttural sound of the mountain shifting in its sleep. The overhang, that roof of rock, dislodged by some hidden lever or rope, began to fall, tons of stone and ancient earth. Without thinking, I threw myself sideways. I struck the hard floor of the cave, and the rifle spun from my grasp. Dust rose in a choking cloud, thick as ash, and the chamber was thrown into a deeper blackness as the fungi's light was buried. I coughed, sucking dust blind. He was on me before I could draw breath. I did not see him. I smelled him, the scent of raw earth and the bite of his chemicals, and an older, graver stink. With a wiry strength, fueled by madness, his fingers, like talons, clawed at my face. I lashed out, connecting with something solid, and heard a grunt. We rolled on the cave floor, a thrashing knot of limbs in the stinking dust. His thumbs found the line of my throat and pressed, and the light behind my eyes burst into novas. I bucked, twisted, my hand flailing on the broken stone, and my fingers closed upon a shard of rock, heavy and sharp-edged. I drove it upward to where I judged his head to be in that blackness. A flat sound, a choked noise. The pressure on my throat eased a hair. I struck again with the stone. And again, he hissed and recoiled from me. I scrambled back, gulping air like a landed fish, my hands sweeping the floor for the rifle, for the hand lamp, where... You do not see, he rasped, his voice ragged now, shot through with rage. I was going to make you magnificent. A glint in the ruin, what faint light of the disturbed fungi still seeped through the dust. He had armed himself from his table with a long knife of obsidian, polished and wickedly sharp. He came at me then, a shadow wielding a thong of black glass. My hand went to my boot and found the hilt of the K-bar. I drew it as he lunged. I met his charge. Steel struck stone with a screech and a spray of tiny sparks, like angry sprites in the dark. We were too close for any other weapon, locked in that deadly grapple. He moved with a frenzied speed, the obsidian blade a whisper of air before my face, then a line of fire crossed my left forearm as it bit deep. Pain bloomed hot and sudden. He made sounds now, low in his throat, like a beast. I ducked under a wide sweep of the black blade that would have opened my throat and drove my shoulder hard into his chest. We went stumbling backward together into the deeper part of the cave, over loose rock, and crashed into his workbench of sandstone. His tools and his jars, his hideous creations, went skittering and smashing to the floor. My collection, he shrieked, momentarily distracted. It was the opening I needed. He'd turned his head for a split second to survey the damage. I thrust upward with the K-bar. He twisted like a cat, but the blade found him, not cleanly, glancing off a rib and then sinking deep into his side beneath his arm. He gave a roar, a sound of ultimate outrage and pain, and staggered back from me, his hands clamped to his side. A dark fluid, black in that dim light, poured through his fingers. I gave him no time. I lunged and tackled him, driving him down amongst the ruin of his workshop, amidst the shard of clay and scattered bones of men and animals. He thrashed beneath me, his strength still a terrible thing, his breath hot on my face. stinking of his own blood. My lamp. I saw it, half buried in the rockfall at the cave's mouth, its beam pointing crookedly to the roof, broken but alive. I could not reach it. He heaved under me, his free hand groping, and closed upon one of the human femurs from his collection. He swung it like a club, and it met my shoulder with a sickening crack of bone. A white and blinding numbness shot down my arm. My grip on the knife loosened. He tried to roll me to gain the top, his eyes burning with a pharaoh light. "The desert," he gasped, blood at his lips. "Accepts your offering." He was strong. God, he was strong. I brought my knee up hard into his wounded side. He screamed, a thin sound, and his back arched. In that instant my eyes, accustomed now to the faint lumina, saw a stone glinting on the floor beside his flailing hand. One of the pieces of blue turquoise he had shown the girl at Henderson's was heavy and angular. As he drew back the femur for another blow, I snatched the turquoise. It filled my hand, heavy, its broken edge sharp. With a grunt that was torn from me by pain and desperation, I brought it down not on his head, but upon the wrist of the hand that held the bone. He howled, a sound thin and high and terrible that echoed from the unseeing rock. He was hurt now. I pressed it, striking with the heel of my good hand at his face, again and again, until he went slack beneath me, his breath coming in shallow, ragged pulls. I rolled off him. Every part of me was a fire of pain. My arm, my shoulder. I lay there in the dust and the ruin of his madness, and breathed the air that was grit and blood and the reek of his chemicals. Above me the stone was indifferent to the affairs of men. His breath beside me was a wet and halting sound that diminished slowly towards silence. With an age of effort, I found my K-bar. Then the hand lamp. The lens was cracked, but the light held. I turned it upon him. He was younger than I would have thought beneath the grime and the wildness of his eyes. Perhaps 30. Those eyes, empty now, still held some ghosts of his terrible devotion. Around him lay the broken instruments of his worship, the ruined icons. The turquoise stone lay near his shattered hand, dark with his blood. My radio. It lay in pieces. Useless. It took what felt like a lifetime, moving through a fog of pain, to reach the emergency beacon in my pack. My hands trembled. Then there was only the waiting. I leaned against the cold stone. The desert wind had found a way into that tomb, and it sighed a low note through the fallen rock. It did not sound like a lament. It sounded like nothing at all. Time had no measure in that place. It might have been hours before I heard the beating of the helicopter rotors against the air, a sound that came from a world beyond the stone. Growing louder. Brody had said he would send what he had. They found me there amongst the detritus of his visions. The man himself was sprawled, offering a few feet from where I sat. They used words like shock. Perhaps what I felt was a great hollowness in an age I had not earned. I had lived. He had not. But a piece of me was buried in that dark cleft of rock, with the bones and the clay and the turquoise stained dark. The desert had taken its due, and that beauty which I had known in the stark and silent places, that spare solace of the rock and the sun, it was now overlaid with the memory of this man, and what he had made of that solitude, a darker shape within the shadow. The wind still called in the high rocks, but now it carried a different voice. And I knew that in the quiet places when the sun was low, I would look for signs in the dust and listen for a footfall that was not my own, and the safety of my weapon would be a familiar thing beneath my hand. Always,